But I really want to move on to this whole dreadful saga of the Andrew Thorburn scandal and the Essendon Football Club have really bombed themselves. This AFL and the way in which they've turned on this bloke, he can't be the CEO of a football club if he's also the chair of a church. What has Australia become, Brom? This is fascism writ large, isn't it?
Yes, and that was an excellent editorial, Gary. And what's happening in this country just makes you want to weep. I mean, the fact of the matter is that 61% of Australians adhere to a religion. 44% of Australians are Christian. That is the largest religious body in the country. Our whole system is built upon the Judeo-Christian principles. And yet we find that somehow it is not only acceptable, but it's fashionable to attack the very fibre of the things that have established this nation. Tolerance is a two-way street. Tolerance means that you can agree to disagree vehemently about things and simply, as I said, agree to disagree and respect the other's ability to hold a point of view. But what has happened here is really quite terrifying, because what is really said by that board of Essendon is that they could never employ a Muslim in that position because of the attitude that Islam has on those issues. They've decided it is unacceptable for a Christian to belong to a church that holds those views. I mean, the fact that the Archbishop of Melbourne and the Cardinal in Melbourne have both come out against what has happened is quite an amazing thing to happen. But the arrogance and the total attempt by Chairman Dan Andrews, the Premier, to simply whip it up and make it even more unacceptable just shows what a dreadful piece of work he is. To try and say that I'm a Catholic, but this is bigotry and this is beyond the pale, trying to make it out to be something it clearly wasn't. Well, Australians really can't tolerate this sort of attitude. They really can't. No. If it's allowed to go on, then the country will be in serious trouble. There has got to be a line drawn in the sand that says people are allowed to have their belief, their religions, and where there is a disagreement, you have respect for the other person's point of view, but you agree to disagree. That is the only way a multicultural system can work. And it's got to be a line in the sand to allow it to work.
Yeah, you've got to talk about what you've got in common. I mean, I see Joseph Gutnick, the Jewish, he's been involved in one of the Melbourne clubs as well. I mean, he's an AFL. He loves his AFL. He's proud of his religion. He's proud of his culture. He's come out and condemned it. I mean, Daisy, I was raised a Christian, and I never deny that for a moment. I am not my brother's keeper. It was one of the teachings of Jesus, and yet Andrew Thorburn has apparently now got to answer for the perceived sins of comments made in a church sermon 10 years ago. He wasn't even there on the day that the sermon was given. This is just dangerous. It is. This is the most bizarre situation, because at least with Israel Folau, he was actually the one that said something that caused the furor. This guy has done nothing except exist adjacently to words that were uttered by someone else in 2013. No one has actually asked Thorburn what his opinions are on the topics of LGBT behaviour and also abortion, which were the two, controversial things that were said in the sermon. No one's actually asked his opinion on them. For all we know, he might disagree with those sermons. Churches, they do have a set of views, but often there's deviation. Yep. No one's asked him that. No one thought to even give him a shot at doing the job, which he was hired for because he's very qualified for it, because being a member of that church board has absolutely nothing to do with being the chief executive of Essendon. So I do not understand how in modern Australia we can be in a situation where he is told you cannot continue in this job while you retain your position at this church.
if that is not discrimination in the workplace on grounds of religion, I don't know what is. And it is incredibly frightening that this is just being cheered on by the likes of Daniel Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, you and I, we've worked around the media, a long time, and media and politics, Bronwyn and I mean, I just simply make the point that I don't ever hear the question of, and I'll have a cup of tea with you, providing you're the same religion as me, or what's your religious view on this? This just isn't what people do. It doesn't happen like this. Essendon are off with the pixies on this.
There are so many things wrong with this situation, Gary. Firstly, the guilt by association issue where, as Daisy said, somebody else said these things, not Andrew Thorburn. And if you look at his record when he was in charge of the NAB, I mean, that's the most woke organisation on the planet. So it stands to reason he probably doesn't agree with what this pastor said. But, I made this point to a Labor senator earlier this week who is of the Catholic faith that if you're going to follow this logic, Anthony Albanese should resign because his religion espouses very similar views to what this church on the hill in Melbourne does. But we're not calling on the Prime Minister to resign. Daniel Andrews is the greatest hypocrite in the country because he claims to be a Catholic, but apparently he doesn't have to resign because his association with the Catholic Church, well, that's different somehow. But again, the crux of this is, what difference does any of this make to the running of a football club? Nobody can explain that to me.
I don't know. Well, other than football in Melbourne in particular is a religion in its own right. And I am seriously concerned about where this is all going to land, because, as you say, if a line is not drawn in the sand on this, and yet we've got political leaders who are out there proselytising their view that I'm going to choose you over you, that's all in the Bible too as well. This is a wrenching problem that is going to now get worse if they get away with this. This is another thing that Daniel Andrews is going to get away with.